Before we begin, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss stories that expose the truth behind real crimes. The truth does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it slips in quietly, disguised as a small doubt, a strange habit, or a detail that does not quite fit. For one woman, what began as a normal married life slowly turned into a nightmare she never imagined. This is the story of how a wife came face to face with a horrifying secret hidden behind the man she trusted most. This case would later shock investigators, disturb an entire community, and raise painful questions about how well we can ever truly know the people closest to us. At the center of this case is Zachary Holly, a man who, on the surface, lived an ordinary life. To neighbors and co-workers, he appeared calm, reserved, and unremarkable. He was not someone who stood out. He did not attract attention. And that is exactly what made this case so disturbing. People often expect monsters to look like monsters, but in reality, they often look like someone you would pass in a grocery store without a second glance. Zachary's wife met him years before the investigation began. Their relationship, by most accounts, started like many others. They met, connected, and built a life together. Friends described their marriage as quiet. There were no public arguments, no obvious signs of chaos. From the outside, it looked stable. But as time passed, small cracks began to form, cracks that would later reveal something far darker beneath the surface. At first, the changes were subtle. Zachary became more distant. He spent more time alone, often locked in a room with his computer or phone. When asked about it, he brushed it off as stress, work pressure, or needing space. His wife tried to be understanding. Like many people in long-term relationships, she believed that rough patches were normal. She trusted him. After all, trust is the foundation of marriage. But unease has a way of growing when it is ignored. His behavior became harder to explain. He was secretive about his devices, protective in a way that felt excessive. Passwords were changed. Screens were turned away. Conversations became short and defensive. When she asked questions, she was met with irritation instead of reassurance. Slowly, the woman who once felt safe began to feel like a stranger in her own home. What made this situation even more unsettling was that there was no clear reason for his behavior. There was no obvious affair, no financial trouble, no major life event that could explain such a dramatic shift. That lack of explanation made the silence heavier. It planted a seed of fear that something was being hidden on purpose. The breaking point did not come all at once. It came through a series of moments that no longer made sense. One evening, while Zachary was away, his wife noticed something unusual on a shared device. It was small at first, easy to dismiss, but curiosity, mixed with fear, pushed her to look deeper. What she discovered would change everything. As she began to uncover files, messages, and online activity, her confusion turned into disbelief. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not an innocent mistake. The material she found suggested behavior that was deeply disturbing and completely incompatible with the man she thought she knew. Her hands shook as she realized the implications of what she was seeing. For many people in this position, denial is the first response. The mind tries to protect itself by finding excuses. Maybe it was someone else. Maybe it was taken out of context. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. She tried to convince herself of all these things, but the evidence continued to grow. The more she looked, the worse it became. At this stage, she faced an impossible choice: confront her husband and risk manipulation or destruction of evidence, or stay silent and carry the weight of what she knew. Fear played a major role. She was living with someone she no longer felt she understood. Someone who might be capable of things she could not fully grasp. Silence felt safer, at least temporarily. But secrets like this do not stay buried. The emotional toll became overwhelming. Sleep was difficult. Anxiety followed her everywhere. She replayed conversations in her head, wondering how long the secret had existed and how carefully it had been hidden. Every interaction with Zachary now felt staged, like she was watching a performance instead of sharing a life. Eventually, she reached a point where silence was no longer an option. The safety of others and her own conscience outweighed her fear. She began documenting what she found, preserving information instead of confronting him directly. This decision would later prove critical to the investigation. When law enforcement was finally contacted, officers approached the situation carefully. Cases involving hidden digital behavior require patience and precision. Investigators needed to verify what had been discovered and determine whether criminal activity had taken place. They understood that false accusations can destroy lives, but so can ignoring credible evidence. As detectives began their work, the image of Zachary Holly as an ordinary husband started to collapse. What they uncovered suggested a pattern, not a single mistake, a pattern that raised serious concerns and demanded deeper investigation. Each new finding confirmed what his wife had feared all along. This was not a misunderstanding. This was something far more serious. For his wife, the realization was devastating. She was not just processing betrayal, she was coming to terms with the fact that the person she loved may have been living a double life. The emotional impact was crushing. Guilt, anger, grief, and fear all collided at once. She questioned her own judgment, wondering how she had missed the signs for so long. This case is not just about crime, it is about trust, manipulation, and the terrifying idea that someone can hide their true self for years. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about how secrets survive inside relationships and how easily danger can remain invisible behind closed doors. Once law enforcement became involved, the case moved out of the private world of a broken marriage and into the structured, methodical hands of investigators. For Zachary Holly's wife, this step brought both relief and fear. Relief because she was no longer carrying the burden alone. Fear because there was no turning back. Whatever the truth was, it was about to be exposed. Investigators began by carefully reviewing the material she had preserved. In cases like this, details matter. Dates, times, file histories, and patterns of behavior all help paint a clear picture. Detectives knew they had to separate emotional shock from factual evidence. Their job was not to judge, but to determine whether laws had been broken and whether anyone was in danger. As they analyzed the digital data, a troubling pattern began to emerge. This was not random or accidental activity. The behavior showed repetition, planning, and concealment. Investigators noted how carefully Zachary appeared to hide his actions, using privacy settings, passwords, and isolated devices. This level of effort suggested awareness of wrongdoing, not ignorance. The more evidence they uncovered, the more serious the case became. What started as suspicion now appeared to point toward criminal conduct. At this stage, law enforcement had to move quietly. Any sign that Zachary knew he was under investigation could lead to destroyed evidence or sudden disappearance. Surveillance and background checks were conducted without his knowledge. Meanwhile, Zachary's wife was living in a constant state of tension. Every normal moment felt fake. Simple conversations felt dangerous. She had to act as though nothing had changed, even though everything had. Investigators advised her not to confront him, explaining that confrontation often leads to lies, manipulation, or worse. Her cooperation became a key part of the case. As detectives dug deeper into Zachary's background, they looked for any past behavior that might explain the present. Childhood history, employment records, online accounts, and social connections were all examined. To the outside world, he still looked ordinary. No criminal record, no history of violence, nothing that screamed danger, and that, once again, is what made the case so unsettling. One of the most disturbing aspects investigators encountered was how long this behavior may have gone on undetected. Timestamps suggested activity stretching back months, possibly longer. This raised an important question. How many opportunities had there been to stop this sooner, and how many people might have been affected without knowing it? Digital forensics experts were brought in to ensure that the evidence was handled correctly. In modern investigations, technology plays a central role, but it must be managed carefully. Any mistake could weaken the case in court. Every file, log, and trace had to be verified and documented properly. During this phase, detectives also considered the psychological profile of the suspect. People who live double lives often rely on control. Control of information, control of perception, and control of those closest to them. Zachary's behavior at home, his defensiveness, and his secrecy all began to make sense when viewed through this lens. While the investigation progressed quietly, small changes in Zachary's behavior did not go unnoticed. He became more anxious, more alert. He asked questions that felt suspicious, as if he sensed something was wrong. His wife noticed this shift, and it increased her fear. She worried he might discover what she had done. Law enforcement prepared for the next critical step: direct contact. Before that could happen, they needed enough evidence to justify it. They could not rely on suspicion alone. They needed facts strong enough to stand up in court. This careful pacing, though frustrating, was necessary. For Zachary's wife, the waiting was unbearable. Each day felt like walking on a thin line. She wondered if he would find out. She wondered if she was safe. She wondered if she had done the right thing. These thoughts haunted her, but she held on to one truth: staying silent would have been worse. Eventually, investigators reached a point where they were confident in their findings. The evidence suggested serious criminal concerns that could no longer be ignored. Plans were made to confront Zachary in a controlled and legal manner. This moment would be crucial. People often reveal more than they intend when they believe they can explain themselves. As this stage approached, detectives reviewed every detail again. They anticipated possible reactions: denial, anger, emotional breakdown, or calm deception. Experience had taught them that the most dangerous suspects are not always the loudest. Sometimes they are the ones who appear cooperative. The tension built steadily toward a breaking point. What had once been a private discovery by a frightened wife was now a full-scale investigation. The truth was closing in, and Zachary Holly was about to face questions he could no longer avoid. The day investigators decided to confront Zachary Holly was planned with precision. Nothing about this moment could be left to chance. Detectives understood that how a suspect reacts in the first minutes of questioning can shape the entire case. A single statement, a pause, or even a change in body language can confirm or contradict months of investigation. Zachary was contacted under a neutral pretext. There was no dramatic arrest, no sirens, no public scene. Law enforcement wanted him calm, cooperative, and unsuspecting. When he arrived to speak with detectives, he appeared composed, almost confident. To someone watching from the outside, he looked like a man with nothing to hide. The interview began with simple questions: background information, daily routines, work schedule. Investigators allowed him to speak freely, knowing that people often reveal patterns without realizing it. Zachary spoke smoothly, carefully choosing his words. He smiled at times. He seemed relaxed, but trained investigators noticed the small cracks. When the conversation shifted toward his online behavior, the tone changed. Zachary became more guarded. His answers grew shorter. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. These were subtle signals, but meaningful ones. The detectives did not accuse him outright. Instead, they presented facts slowly, watching how he reacted. As pieces of evidence were mentioned, Zachary's confidence began to fade. His eyes darted. He asked for clarification more often. He claimed not to remember certain details. Investigators had seen this pattern before. It was the behavior of someone realizing the story they prepared was no longer enough. The most powerful moment came when detectives revealed that the evidence did not come from an anonymous source or a technical glitch. It came from inside his own home. They did not immediately say who had provided it, but Zachary understood. The realization hit him hard. His body stiffened. His breathing changed. For the first time, his calm mask slipped. He became defensive, insisting that things had been misunderstood. He suggested that files could have been misinterpreted, that technology can be misleading. Investigators allowed him to speak, knowing that explanations often lead to contradictions. As questioning continued, Zachary attempted to shift blame. He spoke about stress, about personal struggles, about feeling misunderstood. These statements were not confessions, but they revealed a mindset. He was no longer denying everything. He was justifying it. Detectives then presented clear digital timelines, dates, times, repeated actions. This evidence was difficult to explain away. Zachary fell silent for long stretches. Silence, in an interrogation room, often speaks louder than words. Investigators waited. They knew rushing this moment could ruin everything. Eventually, Zachary asked to take a break. His confidence was gone. The man who walked in believing he could control the conversation was now struggling to maintain control over himself. Investigators allowed the pause, using the time to reassess their approach. When the interview resumed, Zachary's tone was different. He appeared tired, shaken. He no longer spoke with certainty. His statements became vague. He avoided direct answers. At one point, he asked what would happen next. That question alone revealed how deeply the situation had changed. Law enforcement made it clear that the investigation was ongoing and serious. They explained that additional steps would follow, including further analysis and possible legal action. Zachary nodded, absorbing the weight of what he was hearing. He was no longer in control of the narrative. Outside the interview room, detectives compared notes. They believed Zachary's reactions supported the evidence they had gathered. His behavior under pressure aligned with someone hiding something significant. The case, however, was not over. It was entering a new and more dangerous phase. Meanwhile, Zachary's wife was informed that the confrontation had taken place. She felt a mix of fear and relief. Fear of what might happen next. Relief that the truth was no longer trapped inside her alone. The secret that had poisoned her home was now exposed to daylight. From this point forward, the stakes were higher, legal consequences were approaching, and emotions were running hot. Investigators had to move quickly but carefully. Any mistake could give the defense an advantage. Any delay could put people at risk. After the confrontation, the case entered a phase that no one involved could escape. What had once been quiet suspicion inside a home was now a formal criminal investigation. Every step forward carried weight, and every decision had consequences. For Zachary Holly, life no longer followed its normal routine. For his wife, the reality she had feared was becoming official. Investigators moved quickly to secure warrants based on what they had uncovered so far. Digital evidence, interview behavior, and corroborating data had formed a clear pattern. This was no longer about suspicion, it was about accountability. Devices were seized for deeper analysis, and specialists were brought in to examine files that could not be explained away as mistakes or accidents. As forensic teams worked through the data, the volume of material shocked even experienced professionals. This was not a single incident or a moment of poor judgment. The evidence suggested repeated behavior over time. That detail mattered. Patterns tell a story, and this story was growing darker with every file reviewed. Meanwhile, Zachary was released pending further action, but his world had already collapsed. Friends noticed his sudden withdrawal. Family members sensed something was wrong, even if they did not yet know the details. Rumors spread quietly, the kind of rumors that do not need facts to cause damage. Inside the home, his wife was trying to rebuild her sense of reality. Simple things now felt unfamiliar. The person she once trusted had become someone she barely recognized. Every memory was questioned, every moment replayed in her mind with a new, painful perspective. She cooperated fully with investigators, providing timelines, behaviors, and details that now made sense in ways they never had before. What once seemed like harmless privacy now appeared as secrecy. What once seemed like stress now appeared as fear of being exposed. The pieces fit together too clearly to ignore. Legal pressure intensified as prosecutors reviewed the growing body of evidence. This was not a case that could be handled quietly. The nature of the material meant that public safety and legal responsibility were central concerns. Authorities had a duty to act, not just to punish, but to prevent further harm. When formal charges were prepared, Zachary was taken into custody. There was no dramatic speech, no public outburst, just the cold reality of handcuffs and the understanding that freedom was no longer guaranteed. For him, denial was no longer an option. The system had taken control. News of the arrest spread quickly. Friends and relatives struggled to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the allegations being made. Some refused to believe it. Others remained silent, unsure of what to say or who to support. These cases often fracture entire families, not just marriages. Court proceedings began with preliminary hearings. Prosecutors laid out the evidence carefully, piece by piece. Defense attorneys attempted to question procedures, search methods, and intent. This was expected, but the strength of the digital trail made it difficult to create doubt where patterns were clear. Zachary sat quietly through these proceedings. Gone was the confidence seen during the initial interview. He avoided eye contact. His posture was closed. The reality of long-term consequences had settled in. The courtroom was no longer a place of arguments. It was a place of reckoning. For his wife, attending these hearings was emotionally draining. Seeing him in that setting brought waves of anger, sadness, and disbelief. She was not just watching a legal process, She was watching the final collapse of a life she once believed in. Support systems became critical during this time. Counselors, trusted friends, and family helped her process what had happened. Healing did not come quickly. Some wounds do not heal cleanly. They leave scars that change how a person sees the world. As the case moved closer to trial, investigators finalized their reports. Experts prepared to testify. Every detail had to be precise. In cases like this, mistakes are costly. Justice depends on accuracy, not emotion. Zachary's defense explored plea options, aware of the strength of the evidence. Negotiations took place behind closed doors. These discussions were not about innocence or guilt anymore. They were about consequences, about how much responsibility he would be forced to accept. The public remained largely unaware of the full details, and for good reason. The focus was not on spectacle, but on accountability. Authorities emphasized that this case was about protecting others and ensuring that serious crimes were addressed with seriousness. As the legal process moved forward, one truth became unavoidable. The secret that had lived quietly in the shadows was now fully exposed. There was no returning to the life that existed before, no rewriting the past. As the case moved toward its conclusion, the weight of everything that had happened became impossible to ignore. What started as a quiet suspicion inside a marriage had turned into a public legal battle with lasting consequences. The focus was no longer just on what Zachary Holly had hidden, but on what the truth would mean for justice, safety, and the people left behind. Prosecutors entered the final phase with a clear strategy. They did not rely on emotion or shock. They relied on facts. Timelines were laid out in a simple, direct way. Digital records showed repeated behavior over time. Expert testimony explained how the evidence was collected, verified, and preserved. This was important. In cases like this, the truth must be clear, not dramatic. The defense tried to create doubt by questioning intent and interpretation. They argued that data can be misunderstood and that assumptions can be dangerous. This approach is common, but the consistency of the evidence made those arguments difficult to sustain. When patterns repeat, they tell a story that explanations alone cannot erase. Zachary's behavior during these proceedings spoke volumes. He no longer challenged the facts directly. Instead, he remained quiet, often staring at the table in front of him. The confident tone he once carried was gone. The courtroom was not a place where stories could be controlled. It was a place where truth stood on record. Eventually, a decision had to be made. Whether through a plea or a verdict, the legal system moved forward. Responsibility was no longer abstract. It became official. The consequences were real, defined, and permanent. The outcome reflected the seriousness of the actions and the need to protect others from harm. For Zachary's wife, this moment brought a strange mix of emotions. There was no celebration, no sense of victory, only closure. And even that came with pain. Closure does not erase the past. It only places it where it belongs, behind you, instead of haunting every step forward. She spoke privately about how difficult it was to accept that the person she once trusted was capable of such deception. Trust, once broken at this level, does not return easily. The healing process was slow and uneven. Some days felt normal, others felt heavy. That is the reality many people face after discovering a truth they never wanted to know. Public attention faded as the case concluded. News cycles moved on, but the impact did not disappear for those directly involved. Legal outcomes may have an end date, but emotional recovery does not follow a schedule. It takes time, support, and strength to rebuild a sense of safety and identity. Authorities emphasized an important message as the case closed. This outcome was not just about punishment, it was about accountability and prevention. It was about taking concerns seriously, trusting instincts, and speaking up when something feels wrong. Many cases only come to light because someone chooses not to stay silent. The story of this case serves as a reminder that horrifying secrets do not always announce themselves loudly. Sometimes they hide behind normal routines, familiar faces, and quiet habits. Discovery often begins with a single moment of doubt, followed by the courage to look closer. In the end, the truth did what it always does. It surfaced, it forced change, and it left behind a lesson that cannot be ignored, that vigilance, honesty, and accountability matter, even when the truth is painful. As the case finally came to an end, the courtroom emptied, but the story did not simply stop there. For the legal system, a conclusion had been reached. For the people involved, especially Zachary Holly's wife, the aftermath was something far more complex. Justice may have been served on paper, but healing does not follow legal timelines. In the weeks that followed, life slowly shifted into a new normal, a quieter one, the kind that comes after chaos has passed, leaving behind space filled with reflection. Zachary was no longer part of everyday life. His absence was permanent, and the future that once seemed predictable was gone forever. For his wife, rebuilding meant learning how to trust her own judgment again. One of the hardest parts was accepting that she had not been foolish or blind. She had been human. Deception works because it hides in familiarity. It wears the mask of routine and comfort. Coming to terms with that truth was an important step forward. She chose to focus on healing rather than shame. Counseling, distance, and time helped her process what she had been through. Slowly, the constant fear began to fade. Not disappear completely, but soften. The memories no longer controlled every thought. They became part of her past, not her present. This case also left a mark on investigators and professionals involved. Many of them spoke quietly about how important it is to take concerns seriously, no matter how uncomfortable they may be. This investigation began not with a dramatic confession, but with awareness and courage inside a home that mattered. Authorities emphasized that cases like this are reminders of why vigilance is necessary, not to live in fear, but to stay aware, to understand that silence protects the wrong people, and speaking up even when painful can prevent harm. The public may remember this case as another headline, another disturbing story among many, but behind the title was a real family, real trust, and real consequences. True crime stories often focus on the crime itself, but the lasting impact is felt long after the headlines fade. This case showed how the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of surfacing. It may take time, it may come quietly, but it always demands to be seen, and when it does, it forces change. In the end, this was not just a story about a horrifying secret. It was a story about courage, about listening to instincts, about choosing truth over comfort, and about the strength it takes to face reality when everything you believed in falls apart. If there is one lesson to take away, it is this: paying attention can make all the difference. Asking questions matters, and no matter how hard it feels, truth is always worth confronting. Because sometimes uncovering the truth is the first step toward protecting others and reclaiming your own life.